Welcome to the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Hartley. This podcast exists to equip and inspire your heart-centered leadership. Every week, we bring interviews with some of the greatest heart sets and mindsets on the planet. I hope the heartprint of our time spent together is that it creates new possibilities for you and all those you come into contact with. If you'd like to explore what we could make possible for you, then head to abty.co.uk/connect and book in a free 30-minute call to begin our journey together. I just want to express a huge amount of gratitude to our sponsors, Exhale Coffee. I have been a big fan of Exhale Coffee since meeting Alex and the team back in 2022. Exhale is the first coffee to be sourced, roasted and lab tested specifically to maximize its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory potency. An independent lab test has shown that 1 cup of Exhale Coffee has the same antioxidant power as 1.8 kilos of blueberries or 55 oranges. I'm a huge fan, and Mrs. H loves the decaf, especially because she knows that Exhale use the mountain water decaffeination process, which uses only pure glacial water from the highest mountain in Mexico and no nasty chemicals. Simply head to exhalecoffee.com/ABTY for your special offer. And lastly, before I introduce this week's guest, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would really help us leave a greater heartprint on this world. On episode 270, I welcome Professor Stephen Wyatt to the podcast. Stephen is the Professor of Leadership at the University of Bath, as well as the founder and lead consultant at Corporate Rebirth. He is the author of 4 books, the most recent being Antidote to the Crisis of Leadership, released in April 2024. His perspective on leadership, whilst refined through rigorous research, is also informed by his direct personal experiences. His corporate work has mainly focused on transformation to thrive in the dynamic 4th Industrial Revolution and managing international growth and complexity. His most recognised personal venture is the introduction of the sport of polo to mainland China, where he founded the legendary 9 Dragons Hill Polo Club and inaugurated the Gold Cup International Polo Tournament. It's an incredible conversation all about my favourite topic of leadership. It's episode 270 with Professor Stephen Wyatt. Professor Stephen Wyatt, welcome to the podcast. How are you, brother?
I'm good. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and chat with you.
Well, I love talking about leadership, and you created an entire day for us to listen to nothing but leadership at the Leadership Dialogues. That was a great day. How did that day go for you?
Highly stressed in anticipation of it, as you can imagine, 1,000 moving parts. And I obviously have a concept of what I'm trying to bring across, and but no one's been on that journey with me before here in the UK anyway. And so they don't know what I'm taking for granted. You know what I mean? And so it's there's just a load of things that could fall apart. But just actually, what ended up happening was lots of really good people with great intentions and good hearts, and so catching balls at the last minute and things came together. So it was great. Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. So have you run those events elsewhere then? You've done that before?
Similar, not exactly the same. Nothing's ever exactly the same twice, but similar kind of things. I was based in Singapore before moving to the UK. Yeah. I'm actually from the UK originally, but I left when I was a toddler and came back like 5 years ago. And I was in Singapore before coming back here, and I was doing leadership, as they say, in Asia Pacific for a few years there.
I'm glad you said the word doing leadership, because I'll give you some context, right? Because my background was in policing, so familiar with the whole command and control structure. I was caught between cultures. We were going through transformation between command and control, and there was a lot of transformation, post the crash in 2008, and we had to be a lot more innovative, had to be more transformational, and it needed a new style of leadership. And so we were changing cultures from command and control to a values based, and I was in the kind of organizational development side of the business. And a lot of the criticism I got was it was all academic leadership. I needed to get in the trenches, and I needed to learn how to actually lead on the ground. So there's a little bit of snobbery around leadership theory versus leadership in practice. So I'm glad that you've said that you have a career rooted and founded in the applied principles of what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's my background. So I came at leadership. I came into I started formulating my thoughts about leadership through the work I was doing, and my background really professionally was as a senior strategy consultant. Actually, I was a junior strategy consultant that became a senior one, and so I had lots of client engagements at very high levels of pretty major organizations that could pay our fees. I ended up running. I was a regional managing partner for Asia Pacific for a big American firm, and and then I was all kind of tied up with this idea of theory and applied principles and lots of research, and we'd come up with these what I thought were brilliant strategic insights and plans.
Yeah,
and then there would be this like discontinuity between what we had told the client about and delivered and what they were actually able to implement.
Yeah.
And the initial hubris around consulting means that you think that the clients they just don't get it. But then, as you spend a bit more time, you become a bit more humble. I realized that actually what we were coming up with were theoretically great ideas, but we had missed the point of could they actually implement it? What was the leadership capability? What the human resources capability? So, yeah, great competitive strategy, but can they do it? And so, like in 2002, 2003, I started segueing into being a lot more humble and just talking to leaders about the issues they were facing and how they could go forward, and the disconnect between vision and dream and being able to implement and get followership. And so that's kind of really how I got into this whole space. Yeah. And it was very practical, rooted with those guys. And yeah, then I had the opportunity to really explore the subject area with great colleagues and so forth. And then I also founded a whole series of entrepreneurial ventures on the side, and some of which were big and successful, and some of which were just total flameouts. So I got a first-hand experience as well of trying to put my theories into practice.
But those two things are mutually exclusive, are they? I think you can't have one without the other. But
Yeah.
I love leadership. I really think it's like the master key. This is the master key to leaving people, organizations, communities better. And I really enjoyed hearing your story about your time taking polo overseas, because I think one of the your title of your talk was about a tapestry, and I really love. I've used the word mosaic before in the context of leadership, and I really perhaps you could just bring that kind of story to life for us. Into what do you mean by weaving threads of people's dreams into a tapestry?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there, and it took me a while to get to that imagery. But basically, the idea of the idea I have, and I have been criticized for using the word tapestry, and I should find other words. But the idea is that
keep it.
We're creating. Okay, let's have this vision. They're typically, we say, well, what's the fundamental of leaders? They have a vision, and then they're going to get followers to go after that vision, right? And the mindset which can come out of there immediately is something like, I've got a vision, I'm a leader, and I'm going to sell my vision and get other people to buy into it, and they'll become followers as we then march in aligned fashion towards that vision. And what I realized was that that's a little bit arrogant, really. It's quite arrogant and dismissive of other people. And every individual is actually an individual with their own dreams and ambitions and goals and capabilities and fears and all the rest of it. And so it's not so much that we're selling our vision to them. It's more that we get to understand what alignment there can be between what we're trying to knit or make into a strategy, what weave together, and where they are right now and the visions they've got. And so the whole bunch of depths which I love about that analogy, and I sort of go into different ways, but one of which is that, oftentimes we think about, let's say a tapestry, and there's a top and a bottom and a left and right type thing, right? Or something we're weaving. But actually the individual strands rarely point in the same direction as the overall tapestry, right? So you might have a number of strands with horizontal, and the up is up for the overall tapestry. So the picture may have an orientation, the vision we've got to an orientation, but it's made up of individuals who fit into that, who may have a cross thread in that vision. They have a reason for being part of what we're doing for a time, but then they may be going off somewhere else. And also another aspect I'm going to momentarily go on there about these idea of the each individual thread. Not only they've got their own orientation, in that tapestry, you don't really see the ends of any of those threads. Right? They're kind of right somewhere off screen or around the back or wherever they are. And so that's another part of the concept, which is that for the moment of time that we're together, let's make a beautiful picture together, which is your dreams, my dreams, all lined up, and the capabilities and so forth. And then you're going to continue down your thread, which may stay in the picture for a long time or may go elsewhere. And that doesn't matter. What's important is the time that we're together. It's very positive for us both.
Yeah, it changes the perspective, doesn't it, of one of you're a human resource, therefore I am going to use you for my purpose, versus how do we have a shared experience? How do we journey on something like this together where you create a win-win? It's a very different paradigm.
Yeah. And, to bring that sort of more contemporary, because a number of those thoughts I had are actually from quite a way back in my life. But to bring them more contemporary, I recently published a book called The Antidote to the Crisis of Leadership. And, well done. Hey, that's the one. And in there is this idea that we need to have this attitude of caring for the folks that are with us, and part of that is because what I say in there is that today's employee, and maybe a good employee or maybe a difficult employee, but today's employee that you might have in your team may be tonight's biggest critic or advocate on social media. You just don't know, right?
Yeah.
And similarly, maybe they're working with you right now, but they're actually doing a startup, in their own time, and they could buy your company out in a few years' time. They may be your owner. So the relationship that we have with these individuals cannot be seen only through the limited lens of the official role that we have in that current team, organization, whatever it is. Individuals are much more complex and holistic than that. And we've got to see that. So the best thing we can do is aim to have a positive experience for both of us whilst we're in this collaboration. And maybe a long collaboration, maybe a short one, but let's focus on the quality of that experience together.
I won't get too political. It's not my expertise, but we've clearly had a crisis of leadership at the highest of levels over the last few years, resulting in a complete pendulum swing of public sentiment. And what do you think is you've interviewed a lot of business leaders to form the content of your book. Could you summarize what you think the main roots of those, the causes of the crises are?
I think in the political sense, I think it's a bit different to the business sense, but in political sense, there's a huge confusion right now. I'm going to stick to the leadership one. You don't want to go. I'm going to say I could go in lots of different directions this way. There's a confusion in the leadership definition in politics of leadership, good leadership versus high popularity.
Yeah.
Right. And because of the intensity of volume and openness to attack, that is particularly facilitated through social media channels. It's very difficult, I think, for a leader in a political context with high focus and the rest of it scrutiny to do good leadership. and because they're always going to feel attacked.
Mm.
And so you've got this, we've got a situation where the volume of noise and the intensity of an attack is no way near proportional to the size of the population or opinion of the people, right? There's always going to be a negative. I always say this: you can't please everybody all the time on everything. The problem with politics today in Western society is that media outlets look for the disaffected in any one situation, and then it can be overly amplified, whether deliberately so or just simply chatbot amplified. And very few leaders in Western politics are actually prepared to take a stand in the face of that. And so I think that for me is one of the many problems. And if you don't take a stand because you're not value-based, you're not value-rooted, you're not prepared to say, this is why I took this, then you will be blown around trying to swerve and duck and dive, whatever you think the next likely direction of attack might be or critique may come from. So you've confused leadership with popularity, and you're mistaking popularity with volume of noise.
Yeah, I really resonate with what you just said. I really resonate, because what we then see a manifestation of is a lack of integrity, a lack of that rooting, and then the byproduct is what we lose trust. We don't see that integrity, and we lose trust. And if you lose trust in a dog, you don't know if it's going to bite you. You don't want to stroke it. It's that kind of that feeling at the core. And I know that one of the key concepts you talk about. Then the solution to that must be leading from the core, as you say.
Yeah. You've got to. So a vast majority of leadership development programs don't focus on developing the core of a person. There's some lip service to it, and we give you some coaching, but that's usually fixing behaviors. It's not really pushing you deep into fixing trauma or core. One of the big consultancies I work with, which is a global one, I won't mention, has a view which is maybe a little bit extreme, but they believe that if they look at all of their execs that they work with globally, about a third of them have unresolved deep trauma issues, which come out therefore in the behaviors. And I don't know if it's a third, but it's certainly a significant proportion of people. And I use that as an example because vast majority of leadership development programs, particularly run by corporations or with light touch coaching and so forth, do not really address with fixed trauma, and they don't really get into addressing core values. So in core, so I just carry on.
No, I really resonate, and you're speaking my language, because and some of the world will reward some of the behaviors that overworking, perfectionism, all that worldly success built on. I think even like Johnny Wilkinson used to talk about how he was at his most mentally unhealthy whilst he was at his actual best, how the world can celebrate and adore people when they're not well, and that has consequences. Funny enough, my two greatest leadership insights have come from the most interesting of arenas. One was relationships and the other was parenting. The first one was, I interviewed Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote the 5 Love Languages. And in it, is something on the last page kind of haunted me, but it was absolutely speaking into what you're saying, which is, for all the love we don't receive as children, we become adults that seek that in the world. And I was guilty of that in my early management days. The power and responsibility, seeking the love and the adoration with which a young Ryan Hartley did not receive. And that's just little old me living in the southwest of England, let alone some of these people working at the top of these organizations. Incredible power. So I think you're bang on, and I think that is a conversation that is long overdue being brought into the leadership space.
Yeah, but it's frightening, and corporates are often, it's frightening, and it's you can't really quantify the length of the journey it's going to have. It's not like you're going to do 12 modules and then you're going to graduate. Maybe your trauma is really deep, maybe it's not, whatever. But I'll give you an example. So one of the companies I used to work with, I haven't worked with them for a few years, but they're very senior leadership went out of the way and said our recruitment policy is to look for insecure overachievers. They work harder, right?
Wow.
They work
Yeah,
harder. A
yeah.
bit like your Johnny Wilson example. They
Yes.
really push in and they work harder. They're very good at managing upwards. They're always worried about what's going on around. So the insecure overachiever is what they look for. So that was the workhorse.
Yeah. And I think so. I was caught between cultures when I started to talk about leading with heart and leading with love, and not this state of leading for love, but from love. How can I, as a leader, get myself to a position where I lack nothing and I have all that I need, so that the posture of my leadership maybe become more connected, serving? And if there's stuff going on within me, I'm either too focused on me or I'm projecting that on other people. And I think a huge spirit of leadership is an internal, is a mindset, is a spiritual thing for a leader to embrace, because it is am I coming from wholeness, oneness? Am I coming from the idea that I have all that I need, or whether I lack something? And I think that as a root looks very different. Am I posturing on we, or am I posturing on me?
Yeah, I think I think there are several layers of that. So I think there are definitely competent individuals. Avoid the title leader versus manager. But anyway, there are competent individuals in executive positions who have learnt the rubrics and skill sets of things like servant leadership, but are still doing it in and approaching that manner. Not because they don't believe, they believe it's right, but they're basically doing it in a self-serving way. There's a great guy called Chris Ardress. You may have heard of Chris Ardress, relationship guy, and sadly died a few years ago. And he had one of the things most people heard about is the ladder of inference, where I have a lot of disputes happen at the level at the top of the ladder inference, and the ladder inference is like conclusions, what I'm seeing from the top, and what I'm seeing is different from what you're seeing. And basically things like that is like, actually you should balance your advocacy of what you're seeing with inquiry of why someone else is seeing it differently, and so forth. And do that, and then you can go down the ladder of inference until eventually you might find you've got different data sets, pools of data that you're standing in. So it's balancing inquiry and advocacy. And the beauty of what he said is that you can learn the skills. So model one behavior of just advocating, do the usual thing. Model two is learn this idea of advocacy and inquiry. You can do model two, advocacy and inquiry, with a model one mindset. Right. That is such a powerful insight, because it basically says I can adopt the skills and so forth, behavior, servant leadership, whatever, because I want to be more powerful and more effective. Right. Or I'll do the advocacy and inquiry because I'm trying to learn, but I also know that I'm skilled at that, and I can find some flaws in your ladder.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't it be just so much more powerful if it just served as an expression of who I am?
Yeah.
It's like an authentic expression of, I'm going to do this because it is a true representation of who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. But you've got, but for that to happen, totally agree. But if that to happen, you've got to know who you are.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's the part that's missing, I think, for a lot of people. They don't get pushed or have the opportunity to fully see who they are in the real mirror.
And that includes shadows. I've often, the yin and the yang, there's the light and there's the dark, and the two can't be separated. And the most powerful thing for me is in my own leadership development journey hasn't been to double down on all the things that make me great and cut off all the rubbish bits. It's actually to look into the bits that I probably would hide, or don't want to either hide or I don't want to harm people with.
Yeah.
I go, okay, cool. There's power in facing that, because it sets the context for the team. It sets the context for the fact that this is where my stress behaviors are going to come out. This is where my weaknesses come out. And this is where I'm going to need other people to, it's that tapestry thing again, isn't it? That I'm not all threads. I need other people.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you went about tapestry, but so many thoughts off that. So one of them is, of course, so I do values work, right, with the people I work with, and there are lots of ways of doing it. But if you ask someone to write down the values they adhere to and they hold very important to them, they usually don't know. They usually come up with long lists, and they'll have their, you tell them, go, well, what's your top 5 or top 6, and they'll get to those. And then if you give them a list of 500 values and say, go through that and then choose a few more, they'll also add in a whole bunch. So it ends up, very much like, I like the sound of all these values.
Yeah.
Right. So then you get to the question, which is, when in the last 18 months have you stood on these values at risk to yourself, your reputation, whatever?
Yeah.
When have you actually stood on that? Just give me an example on each one.
Yeah.
That's very unlikely. I mean, very difficult for people to come up with actual examples where at risk themselves, they've stood on that, a potential cost to themselves.
Yeah.
And you go, well, if you're not standing on your values, then they're not really your values, are they?
Yeah. Aspirational. Are
Yeah,
they?
or it's the voice of the crowd, or what they've heard from their parents or from other people. So even that very simple exercise, you often find you start helping people peel back at least a couple of the surface layers and actually start thinking into themselves.
Yeah. I could tell the difference. So when I do values work with people as well, and we've got these like cards and arrange them into hierarchies, and I know the ones that are not sure because they look at me and they go, "Are they good?"
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I don't know. You tell me. Do they serve as a reflection of you?
Yeah.
And what's important?
Yeah. And so that goes back to the issue of politics and so forth, or good leadership. If you don't know really what your values are, you won't stand on them because so if you think that it's about popularity, and you'll just blow in the wind as social media or chatbots, whatever, come at you. So it's only by being strongly anchored on your value set that you will take the decisions which risk reducing your popularity.
It's such a paradox, isn't it? Such a paradox. And the word that you said earlier, which is really interesting for leaders to think about, is followership. And I'd love to have your perspective. And this was the second greatest insight that I got through my podcasting. I interviewed a parenting expert. His name's Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who wrote a book with Gabor Mate it's called Hold On to Your Kids. And in it, he says that it's not the parent who sets the context for parenting. It's not like, I want to be the best parent I can be, therefore I'm the parent. He says it's the child that sets the context for whether they give the authority to the parent to parent. And that authority is given when a child feels like there is a connection. And I was like, I think the same is true of leadership. I think the same is true. I think if a follower feels like the leader cares, or there's a connection, or there's something there present, there's a condition present, then the follower sets the context and says, I will be a willful follower of you. Whether I'm safe enough, whether I'm inspired enough, either way, I choose you as my leader. I will follow you because I want to, not because I have to, and your title says I should do.
That's great. No, that really resonates. And it's a great insight. I think the how I look at it, so I'll go almost back to that sentence I said before, is that in our time together, as the threads cross, whatever, it has to be a great experience for both. Right? And the trajectory you're on may be long, that someone's on may mean you're together a short time or together a long time. But what you want is that it's a great connection at that time. It's a great experience for both. And so the leader's job so the title of my talk the other week or last week was, weaving a tapestry from the threads of others, essentially. And so for that to happen, it's not, you've got to understand the multiple different threads that there are, right? They've got different colors and strengths and so forth, and they can fit in different places. But it's the leader's job to understand that. It's not the leader's job to sell their vision and get everybody to buy into their vision, right? And so, yes, followership is understanding each thread or each individual and how they can be woven together. And that requires the adaptiveness of the leader, the empathy part, the sense of caring, and all those aspects which get you into understanding the other, rather than banging your head on the wall and going, I just told you it's a great vision, it's going to be good for you. Maybe.
One of the things I wrote down in my notes from last week was that I got from your talk was that you don't have to sell the end state. Just invite people for the next step. Yeah. And I think that followership is, it really made me think about the horse hand, the young lad. Maybe you could talk about him, because I think he's a great example of that followership, where you found Maybe he didn't need, that guy wasn't motivated by your grand vision of the events that you were putting on, but there was something specific about what he was able to do. Maybe you can speak into that specific human being.
Yeah.
How he got involved in your tapestry.
Yeah, that's Catcher. There are so many stories on from that project. I could go on forever, but the Catcher in particular I focused on last week. And so my big project was to introduce the sport of polo, horse polo, not water polo, into China. And this is a few years ago. And the sport was not registered. There was no infrastructure in support of it. There were no sports horses in China, apart from a very small handful. And international agreements had been to export sports horses to China were not in place or were not active at that time. So there's a lot of challenges, and particularly they were challenges because of this one very big project of to set up a race club near Beijing, which had been extremely well funded by powerful Chinese people, and they had actually launched the race club and imported loads of horses, and then fallen foul of gambling registration regulations, and the whole thing being shut down rather brutally, as it turned out. Now, the story therefore starts with this guy Catcho, who was part of that, who was working as a young stable lad in that big project in China. And when most of the horses were massacred and slaughtered when the project was abandoned, he had taken it upon himself at his own risk and cost, and with no means at all, as poor lad he was, to protect a handful of horses, to look after them himself in a very rough, and just an industrial area, not in a nice countryside park or anything like that. And I was desperately looking for horses for my project, introducing Polo, as I said. And my dream and vision for Polo was big club with lots of powerful people involved with it and enough money going around and so forth. And so it's kind of like a deja vu. Catcher had seen that and seen it blow up in the race club. And so when we met, he was not interested at all in buying into the vision of the club, what I want to do with it, or the involvement of these people. What he was interested in was the survival of these horses. In China, in vet step that we've had in common for that very first step together. He would come and bring his horse to be with me, and continue to learn. Environment which supported him, and his horses were
And we're back.
Yeah, so none of the things that I was aiming to do in my vision were interesting to Catcho, but what he needed time, or wanted at that time, was a way to carry on learning about horse care. There was no horse veterinary taught in China, or no medicines in China. There was no qualified vets in China for horses. He wanted to carry on learning that himself, but he wanted his horses to survive. And I needed some horses, and someone who's enthusiastic, and the heart was in the right place for horses and horse welfare. So the agreement we got to was that he would come to join me. I was near Shanghai, so quite a very long way from Beijing, and we would do that next step together. And that's one thing, we just needed to find a way that our time together would be really positive for where we were. And our threads may have crossed only for a little period of time as we're building that tapestry, but let's make that experience as positive as possible for both of us. And so that's where it went. And as a result, he actually, the experience was positive and things grew. And don't want to get ahead of myself and give you more of the story, but he stayed and was fundamental to the journey that we then went on as a club, as a team of people, and and it was a very heartwarming journey that went. So I owe him a lot for the whole success of everything we did there.
So you have these experiences, these real driven experiences, and you find yourself in your influential position that you are now at the University of Bath. How do you take such an experience and convey that to some of these top corporate leaders with how to create followership?
Yeah. So really, that people tend to think they approach things in a with a false expectation of continuity. I think in many cases, it's like, this is like it is right now. We're going there. I've got a 5-year vision. Of course, we're marching it together. Well, maybe this person only cares about the next 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is. So this idea that you have to celebrate and make the most out of your time together now. Right? That's how you do that. Is not you put your family dreams on hold or whatever you've got whilst we achieve our 5-year plan. No, it's about how do we get that balance that now is a positive time for you. If it's a positive time for you now, you'll still be here in 5 years' time, probably, or maybe not, but it will still be positive. So that idea about the time frame of the individual, not the time frame of the leader, I think is really important. And also the context of the individual, the followership part, what can make it successful. In today's environment, one of the big things that's going on is a lot of people are really fearful of AI and job displacement that's going on from that. And it's really interesting when you do a survey, as we did, on that, and that the people at the top of the enterprise tend to not be very fearful about it. Right? It's like, it'll come in, we'll adopt it, we'll try and find it. We know we don't want to be too late, we'll bring it in, but they're not really fearful of it, right? And surprisingly, that the people at the bottom of the enterprise are really not super fearful of it either. It's the people in the middle are most fearful. And why is it the people at the bottom are not so fearful? Because essentially what they're already doing now is they're self-directing their own development. Like they're doing online courses to get someone. They're trying to get themselves future ready. The middle band are the ones that are going like, well, I don't want to be a programmer, the lower end of the organization. I'm not leading the corporation. This is really frightening to me and threatening to me.
Yeah.
So I use that very simple example because as a leader, you've got to be able to see where each person is, wherever they are in that hierarchy. And there's not one size fits all. It's not AI is good or AI is bad. For a number of people of lower levels or younger generations, they're actually thinking, this is, I'll get on this tech wave and I'll surf this tech wave and it will open up lots of possibilities for me. Maybe not with your company, sir, but in my own startup or things I'll do. So it's a great hunger for reinvention. So you got to see where relationships are, and that fear of the future can be something you can address. How you support people through that, and that's like Cacho, our upgrade on horse veterinary. Maybe upgrade your skills on AI or managing through change, or moving the idea from we're going to go into an era of continuous evolution. That's what we're going to celebrate, not lurch from one programmatic change to another programmatic change. So how do we get real capacity in the organization that you get comfortable wherever you are in the organization with making change happen at your level? So these kind of things are the lead understand own frame of reference and set of fears and concerns. They need to engage with that. So this time together, no matter how long it lasts, is a positive experience. That's how you create followership. Also, of course, the belief that we're actually going somewhere that's useful or meaningful. So we have a lot more values coming across now in terms of, is this about making money for the shareholders, or is this going to be having greater purpose as an organization? Do I want to be signed up for that purpose? So again, is this a useful period of my life to be involved with this enterprise? And so followership is those kind of things. another one I'd put in there actually is we're seeing an era of disintermediation. So we used to have it used to be possible for leaders to be relatively remote and have episodic, like annual reports, whatever, town hall meetings, I mean, when they would, come out with their polished statements, and the communications team would polish it for them. And now that doesn't really cut muster with a lot of people. They want to see what you're really like, and they'll troll through your, whatever you posted over the last 15, 20 years of your life, or however old you are, and looking for consistency in how you communicate and who you are, and consistency between the values you espouse and how you live. And if you go back to some of the politicians' issues that you're talking about before, I mean, that disconnect between what is stated versus what is found to be done by individuals is there are fewer places to hide now. And if you are inconsistent between what you say your values are and how you actually live, people will find it out, and that'll dismantle trust very quickly.
Some accountability to that.
Yeah, I'm going to just pause. So yes, accountability. There's one. If you want to be, I'm going to avoid saying any names. But if your value set is being misogynistic, go for it. But just don't say you're not.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If that's what you believe, if you think that you want to be extreme left wing or extreme right wing, that's who you are. So let it, as long as you know what you stand for and stand for it, then people can follow you. So so the accountability part is you should be accountable to. I say this in the part I talk about and work on responsible leadership. Like I said before, you can't please everybody all the time on everything, right? So you need to choose who you are going to be accountable to, or responsible, or what you're going to be responsible for. And the vast majority of leaders that I meet do not make that choice.
Why do you think that is?
I think they're afraid. It's a bit like I'm afraid to stand on my values and really stand on my values. And also it does require inward reflection, because if you think about strategy is often defined by what you don't do rather than what you are going to do. And if you choose who you're going to be accountable to and what you're going to be responsible for, making conscious choice, then you are also defining what you are not going to be responsible for or accountable to. Do you have the courage to stand on that?
Yeah. Well, it kind of comes back to the wounds bit that we talked about earlier, because I definitely did not have the maturity to handle some of the scrutiny that I got when I used to share my views and my opinions of leadership, with love and with passion and enthusiasm, because I genuinely wanted to help people learn what I'd learned. I got judged. People sitting around with my social media profile saying, "What does Ryan Hartley know about leadership?" And that for me triggered a wound that I didn't realize I had, which is one of judgment and abandonment, and so I didn't handle that very well. And what did I do? My response was to hide behind the work of Simon Sinek. Don't judge me. This is Simon Sinek, and it's very much that, isn't it? I wasn't able to take accountability or bravely stand because I felt like it opened me up to, and that's what courage is, isn't it? Is to do that regardless of the emotional risk and exposure that we would put ourselves towards.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so the exact point. If you don't know your values, and you don't really know who you are choosing, not someone else is choosing your values and not someone else choosing who you should be responsible for, then you can't have the courage to stand. Because you're just going to blow around with the wind, going like, how's popularity going? Oh, this one else has got an opinion on, I should be responsible for this. And that's one of the negatives of this movement around responsible leadership, is that a lot of leaders are feeling critiqued for the consequences, they call them first order or even second or third order consequences of decisions that were made previously. Okay. It's very unbalanced, because they may have taken a really well-considered decision at that time,
Yeah.
No one knew
Yeah.
what the future was going on. By definition, leaders have to take decisions when we don't know the outcomes because we don't know the future. So was an irresponsible decision just because a outcome happened or a second order outcome happened that is unpopular may not have been irresponsible. So it's a large it's becoming quite a large stick to hit people over the head or threatens to hit people over the head, and therefore is becoming unproductive. So the session last week, as you went to, thank you, we call it intentional leadership, right? So what was your intention? Was your intention to be irresponsible? Probably not, right? Was your intention to get this outcome? Did the outcome happen or not? You could have made a bad choice, or you just didn't know the future. But did you own, with great intentionality and thought and careful consideration and involvement of people, were you intentional in the decision?
Yeah.
So I would argue that's really where we need to go, which is intentionality, rather than somebody else's definition of responsibility later on.
Yeah. I think the police were actually pretty good at that back in the day because they had this model called the national decision-making model, which, for police officers to, rationalize why they took certain action, they have to run the NDM, the national decision-making model. And it very much gets you to think about what intent, what decisions, what information was available to you at the time in good faith, because we've got the smarty tube of we now know the future. And you can't judge that decision based on what you now know in the future because it's full of biases and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and also there's always cause and effect, particularly like at national level governments and so forth. But there is like if we went one way, then it sets off a future. It impacts the future. If we go a different way, and it creates a different future. So there's causality and involvement in the decisions we take. And again, if you take in the third order consequences in 5 years' time of a decision that was made, well, yeah, maybe the outcome wasn't particularly good, or maybe it was even bad. But if you'd gone a different path, maybe you had a different future, which would have been even worse.
Yeah, and I guess rooted on integrity and values, then, or at least virtues, then if there were mistakes that were made, they would be identified, they would be open-minded, they would be learned from, as opposed to let's delete those emails, let's delete those WhatsApp messages, and yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, so yeah, the deliberate deletion of WhatsApp messages is pretty condemning, I would say.
It's a breach of values, breach of public trust.
Well, it's the fact that you were writing them in the first place.
Right.
So that's where your values are. Because that's what you're expressing in private. So if you weren't happy having your own thoughts out in the public domain, then you should be questioning whether you're fit for that role.
Yeah, I'm conscious of our time. We're conscious of our time together. I want to make sure that we've covered some key parts of your work. Is there anything else within the antidote to the crisis of leadership that you'd really love to share? Maybe talk about the axioms or the mindsets involved. What would you love to share?
Yeah. So one of the things I guess we kind of entered into the realm a little bit, but this idea of being adaptive all the time. So I mentioned continuous evolution. So another one of those things that it would challenging from past behaviors is ideas of the infallible leader.
Yeah.
Right. So this idea that you know what, the leader doesn't know. Okay, let's just get over that. No one knows the future, right? The leader's there to take the best decision and get other people to be supportive of that, or to be bought into it in some way or whatever. So you want the best decision for that entity, that enterprise. Now, what does that mean? If we don't know the future, that doesn't mean we become irresponsible. It means we've got to be looking broadly and with great attention at the decisions that have been made and saying, does it need to be course corrected? Does it need to be changed? And again, I would say we've got a bit of a disconnect between the reality of leading today and what you see in major corporations or in governments, which is that the media in particular seem to like saying, well, 5 years ago, you said whatever, you haven't achieved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I've changed my opinion, maybe the world has
Yeah.
moved
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
from that, just saying. And
Yeah.
so it's not a sign of poor leadership that your ideas and opinions evolve.
Hmm.
I would argue that if you don't evolve, it's probably poor leadership.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean to say it's being indecisive. So you need to be decisive, but then continuously learning. So the language I use is course correct, right? There are very few decisions that you take that can't be and shouldn't be course corrected. Like virtually all will, as the future unfolds, need course correction. The leader's job is to course correct in a timely manner, not wait too long saying, I said this and it will have to say, and not being fearful of recrimination if they course correct. So we think so. Thinking more instead of taking yes, no, black, white decisions, thinking more about creating options and experiments. This is the direction we're moving. We've all laid out a vision for the future of the country, for our corporation, whatever it happens to be. Taking all decisions in line with that, with the best information available now,
Yeah.
and being attentive as things change, circumstances change, such that we stay focused on the outcome we want. There's nothing worse than shooting off your rocket in a certain direction, and then the target moves, right? And then you say, well, I can't change the rocket trajectory. That's just irresponsible. So I think that this is course correction as targets move, targets are always moving. So we need to have this frame of courage from the leader that that's possible, and an understanding through demonstrated good practice that it's not incompetence to change and course correct, change your opinion and course correct. It's actually a sign of strength to do that. And so there needs to be a supportive and expectant environment. And I think increasingly we're seeing that in the business environment. I think there's a we're still beset with more traditional views that the leader should always be right, and if they're ever wrong, it's a sign of fallibility in the political sense.
Yeah, I wonder whether we're going to embark on a period of suspicion when our leaders look like they've got it all together. They look too polished. Because we all know the reality of what it means to be human, and I think if we're not fallible, then there's no need for anybody else. There's no one else that's going to contribute. No one else is going to have a better idea or a perspective or a solution, and and that's what you're talking about as the subtitle of your book, which is about opportunity and complexity. And opportunity comes from sometimes the most unexpected of spaces or places or people. And yeah, I just think we have to learn. I just wonder, some of the antagonists to those opportunities. I think the busyness of business is a huge antagonist to being able to ask those open questions, to think about what is it that we don't know, what are the opportunities. Like, how do you speak into did that kind of come up in your interviews with these leaders, that how fast and busy people were?
I, I would just say yes, but not as a major new theme. So I don't discount that as a super important one. My book is really trying to cut through to say what's the new rather than what's been there for a while. So I didn't focus on that particular aspect. One thing that we did look at, or a theme that did come out, is this notion. I use a diagram when I say this, so I always smile when I'm doing this, when I talk about this with clients, which is you need to get outside your cockpit whilst you're flying the plane.
Yeah.
Right. So so you're flying the plane, you're the captain of the plane, isn't it going well, kind of stuff, and you got you can't really see outside because of clouds or whatever, and you've got great instrumentation, and all the instruments say you're doing well. So you're kind of flying along. And so the analogy is that outside is the future. We don't really know the future. We don't know the future. I have some idea where we're going. But the dials of inside the airplane and so forth, instruments are indicators of how we're doing as our corporation or our mission for the things we said we were going to achieve. Are we on milestones and so forth, returns? And so that's all kind of looking good. But there can be a total disconnect with how the world's changed outside or is changing. And so but there's lots of dials, lots of instruments. And so the temptation for a business leader or any leader is to be looking at the dials all the time and making sure that the engines are still working and all that kind of stuff. Passengers are not screaming. So and the fuel's not running out. Whatever. Doing those checks and controls of the business all the time, right? But what we need to be doing is getting out and looking outside the cockpit to actually what's going on outside, right? So a business leader needs to get outside and look outside. So the simple language, if you don't like my analogy, simple language is, if you're in the cockpit, you're working in the business.
Yes.
You're flying the plane. Right? That's what you're doing. But what you need to be doing as a leader is, in unstable, complex environments, is working on the business.
Mm-hmm.
Really, how's the environment changing, right? So historically, you may have got in this balance. So let's say a leader always did a bit of both. And historically, I would say that you would do your working on the business at your 5-year strat review point, or obviously there was something major that went awry, or a new opportunity that actually woke you up. But it would be pretty much most of the time you would be working in the business. And now, with the speed of change, the dynamism of the environment we're in on so many levels, an increasing proportion of a leader's time needs to be spent working on the business, outside of it. And I think now there's a real premium for leaders, which is why essentially I wrote the book, not only because of all the scandals and everything we're seeing, but what we're seeing is all the breakdowns of leadership and value destruction and so forth happening because people are trained with this expectancy of working in the business or in the country. Well, they need to be doing it looking outside and doing that a lot more. And so there's a greater disconnect, or a separation, not a disconnect, a greater separation between working in the business is more like a manager's role. Working on the business is staring into the fog of the unknown and making decisions about change. And that's definitely leadership. So I think there's an increasing importance and premium for leadership now, and those things that you get out of the cockpit. It doesn't mean to say you're always outside the cockpit, you need to be inside the well, but it's that analogy of like, if you're only inside the cockpit, not looking out the window at what's really happening and unfolding as the world outside is changing really rapidly.
Yeah, I used to be a nerd. I used to be the head of performance, so data analytics, used to inform the police and crime commissioner, the chief, of all the kind of metrics, the dashboards that you talk about. And so often I'd be using the stuff, sometimes the stuff that matters can't be measured, and it made me think of a really powerful, sometimes you read something in a book and it's like, wow, it's just completely just changed my perspective. I remember seeing something in Black Box Thinking, by Matthew Said, which was all about the planes that came back from the war. And what they would do is they would look at all the bullet marks on the planes and then go, right, let's reinforce where the bullet marks are. So what they inevitably ended up was a fleet of planes that returned home with bullet marks in the wings. So they would reinforce the wings. It was a paradox. Because they should have been measuring where the bullet holes were in the planes that didn't
make it
home.
Right.
And that, for me, as someone, as a leader, as a business owner, it feels very practical to go and work on the things that I can see. The bullet holes in the wings showed me something practical to go work on. But the inverse was true. Because the bullet hit the wing, it managed to get home. Don't mess with that. Don't meddle with that. Go and look at the things that maybe you can't see. And sometimes you need to get out of the box to be able to see those things.
So leaders spending more time out of the box is really important. And so, but there's lots of pressures and expectancy and traditional thoughts about the role of the chief executive and so forth that are frustrating that to happen. And so this is one of these big things that needs to shift systemically, right? So it's a big challenge.
Super conscious of your time. I just want to put in one conversation about talent. This is a heart-centered, people-based leadership podcast, and one of the stories in the business world over the last few years, particularly in the home working people. I can't remember what the name of it was. People leaving, the mass walkouts of organizations. Talent is, I guess, at a premium.
Great resignation.
The Great Resignation, right. So where do we sit now with the Great Resignation? Are we beyond that? Is it still happening? Are companies and leaders informed about how to bring good talent into their organization? You talk about winning the race for talent. Like, how does one set their organization up to do that?
Yeah. So I think it's a little bit provocative, but the way I was frame this is, the war for talent is over. and nobody won. Right. So we have, it's a very frequently mouthed expression, there's a war for talent, right? And I go, yeah, but nobody won. So the issue is, so therefore I reframe that as a race for talent. And race for talent is because what I'm saying is that it's about finding people who can go on a journey with you and be developed with you. I'm increasingly seeing the truth of the expression hire for fit, train for skills, rather than the old, have you got all the skills? Have you done all this previously? And so forth. And have you done all this previously? It's a little bit like your airplane going back with shot for a hole story, So what you really want is, I think, hire for fit and train for skills, and the third part of that is deploy for impact. So the talent market, I think, is going through major revolution. And again, there are a vast number of traditionally orientated organizations which are simply going to lose out and are losing out very clearly, right? So the idea that I say this in a relatively contained way. If we have a fluid internal marketplace for talent, whereby the best talent is identified and deployed to the most important projects with the best fit, then the chances are we'll retain that talent more. We'll create incentives for that talent to self-develop because they want to be deployed, right? So creating an internal market is much more impactful for an organization than participating as a static element within a wider ecosystem market. Because talent is still mobile. You really want it to be mobile within your organization rather than go somewhere else, right? So that transformation is possible now. It's there's plenty of tech out there which is supporting HR do that, but what you're seeing is a very significant difference now in performance and talent management between traditionalists who do job descriptions and little boxes. And basically do a job description, you then hire someone who's overqualified, you get them to fit into that little box and pretend they don't have all the other skills to them. And then you give them a grading, and every 6 months or a year or whatever, you promote them up the grading, right? That is the best way to destroy talent motivation and get them to leave, right? If you just saw people holistically, the skills they've got rather than the experiences they've got, and how impactful they are on different projects, and you enable to have a fluid marketplace internally, development goes up, engagement goes up, impact goes up, retention goes up.
I could talk to you for hours, but that would neither be a good use of your time. So I just want to say you got 2 books out. I haven't talked about, what's the title of the first book?
Management and Leadership in the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
So again, we could have just talked for hours. We didn't even talk about the industrial, although we've highlight aspects of it. We've not put it front and center in the conversation. So maybe we'll have to do another one another time. But thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for so much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom on all things leadership. I have a word here at Always Better Than Yesterday. It's called Heartprint, and the word really symbolizes the ripple effect that we have. I think leaders leave a heartprint. It comes from my time in policing, where we used to talk about the Lockhardt's exchange principle. We used to teach detectives that every contact leaves a trace, and we used to teach detectives to go over the scene and try and find where the offender has left of themselves. And I think leaders do the same. I think leaders leave a trace wherever they go, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But what do you hope your ripple effect will be? What do you hope the legacy of your leadership and all the work that you're putting out into the world will be?
I really want, if there was kind of distilled down to one thing, I would like the leaders who come forward and lead into the current future are much more intentional and grounded and confident in themselves, right? And so it's a mental wellness, which I believe is essential in order to have positive impact.
Yeah, and with your position at Bath University, you're at the forefront of developing leaders. Does it bring you hope? Does it bring you optimism?
I really invest a lot of myself in the people who come through. It's something I care about as an issue, but I do think that, again, you need to ignite that passion and confidence and courage within each individual. So I would say that I am really energized by the folks who I see through the various different forums. I wouldn't say classroom, but we rarely use classrooms these days, so whatever. And really, more than that, touched by hearing their life-changing experiences when they leave us and go on. And a number of the individuals who either participated or volunteered to participate in leadership dialogues this year are students, executives that I've worked with before, who are now have changed jobs, doing other things, and are much more intentional about how they lead. So I love that community, and I find it not only energizing, reassuring, and humbling all at the same time. And yes, I want that to be something that just grows and grows.
Love that. I'll put all your good links, including those 2 books, in the show notes. We'll be honored if you'd leave us a final thought from your good self.
Well, I'll go back to the tapestry part. I mean, what I think is, if you have this idea that your vision is made up of the visions of everybody else, then that gives you a piece of humility, and they'll be with you short time or long time. And the last part of that is, and you're a part of someone else's tapestry that they are weaving. So you got to always see that it's not you're the be all and end all. There's always a bigger, another way. So you're always also part of other people.
Love it. Professor Stephen, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And I wish you well. And I love what you're doing, Lloyd. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Hey, my friends, thank you for making it to the end. I hope that our time spent together today has left you a little bit better than before you push play. I'd really appreciate if you just took a moment to leave a review to allow me to meet more people where they are and hopefully leave them a little bit better too. If you're curious to know how I, through Always Better Than Yesterday, can serve you, your team, your organisation, then head to alwaysbetterthanyesterday.com to connect. And while you're there, let me know 1 or 2 things that you're going to do as a result of listening to this conversation. I absolutely love hearing your thoughts, your reflections, and the things that this spark in your own heart and mind. If you want more insights from my heart and mind, I do send out short episodes on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, and again, I hope that they serve you well. I appreciate you listening. I'm Ryan Hartley, host of the Always Better Than Yesterday podcast, a podcast for heart-centered leaders just like you. Keep leading, my friends. Always love.